you. Mr. Dold, the gentleman from Illinois, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, we've got a very serious housing problem in this country. When serious problems arise, whether they're in the private sector or in the government, our first priority should be to thoroughly investigate the problem and correctly define what the actual problem is. And then we think about possible solutions, and we try to identify the most cost-effective solutions while also trying to identify the potential unintended consequences and risks. Once we settle on the most cost-effective solution, we need to think about how best to implement and execute that solution. Certainly that's what we do in the private sector. At all times, we recognize that we're necessarily dealing with imperfect information, with imperfect institutions, and with frequently changing circumstances. And at all times, we recognize that mistakes are possible at any point in the problem-solving process, and we should expect that future changes and improvements should be made. So after the implementation and execution, our next obligation is to continually reevaluate the results while looking for necessary changes and improvements. We don't do that very well. So after we ask whether we correctly defined the problem in the first place and whether our assumptions were valid, we also should ask whether we choose the best solution, whether we properly implemented and executed the solution, and whether we've created unintended negative consequences. Very simply, for any serious business problem or public policy problem, we must ask what worked and what didn't work, and more importantly, why. And then we are obligated to make the necessary changes and improvements. We're not rigidly tied at all costs to previous decisions. We're not trying to prove at all costs that we were perfectly correct all along and that nothing ever needs to change, or that more of the same is the only possible answer. Instead, changes and improvements and corrections are unquestionably a necessary and useful part of the entire problem-solving process. That is the problem, and that's why we're here today, is to evaluate the historical results of the Obama administration's efforts to solve this very serious public policy problem, which is the housing crisis in this country, and to identify the possible changes and improvements to those efforts. We're all depending, and the country is depending on us to do this as we look at the excess glut of housing that's out there. So I look forward to having our witnesses help us identify these issues and move forward for the American public. I yield back.